So I'll start with, we were born here, well, 20 miles south of here on a plantation. And I'm the oldest of 12 children. My parents worked the fields. My mother was the most resourceful of the two. My mother grew up with a stepfather who taught her how to ride horses and catch fish. So she was quite comfortable doing those things and providing for the family. My father was an only child, but he was born into a family. His mother became impregnated with him while she was not married, which in those days, as you all know, was not cool. So he grew up thinking that he was her brother as a young child, as opposed to being her son. So we grew up with that family. So we grew up with on our plantation. There were some of our mother's folks, but mostly our father's folks. So we always had lots of first cousins to play with. And so my life as a young child was pretty much Tom Sawyer-ish. We were able just to run wild every day and just eat berries and catch fish and just do, and then do all kinds of wonderful, exciting things, because there was no fear. The only fear was of nature itself. But as we got older, we had to stop that kind of life and go work in the fields. So we did. So, but still, when it rained, which was our time, when our parents were glad to get rid of us, we just had, our lives were just so much fun.
What was the name of the plantation?
Several.
We went through several.
Griffin's plantation.
But we were there before. It was Swift Peters, the Peterson Plantation.
Mary
Miss Mary Martin.
Mary Martin.
Griffin, yeah.
Riley. There were several. My father moved from plantation to plantation. He didn't stay in one place too long.
Okay.
We were called shoppers. I can't get the word out. Sharecroppers.
Yeah, we were sharecroppers. We were sharecroppers, yeah.
And what were the main crops?
Cotton.
Cotton was the only crop. Yeah, soybeans were introduced later. But as children, the primary crop was cotton. So we started in the fields at an early age, helping out, doing what we could with the family.
How old were you when you started helping out in the field?
8 and 9.
I was about 6 because I was the oldest. And I was the more vocal of the family. I was the oldest, so you had older child expectations.
Okay.
But we started picking cotton about 6 or 7.
Was your father moving around to try to get a better working condition situation, you think, or was it?
There were a lot of things going on. Our father was kind of mouthy. And at in those period of time, you couldn't talk back. And my father had the propensity to talk back, so he was told to move. So we threw everything we owned in the sheet, and you're gone. So there were a lot of reasons. He was also looking for better opportunities, but there were none. You either picked cotton or you drove a tractor or didn't. There was nothing else that he was trained to do. Although my father was an athletic swimmer and a baseball player, but in those days there were no outlets for that. I'm talking in those days like I'm talking back in the medieval times, but yeah, this is a scant 70 years ago.
Right.
Yes.
Right. What was family? You mentioned kind of like a Tom Sawyer kind of feeling. What was the family life like? Were you raised around elders, aunts, uncles?
Yes.
Like what kind of?
They were our lives. They were our outlets. I mean, my father had lots of uncles around and aunts and lots of first cousins who we thought were our first cousins. So family life was centered around our families. That's who we had lunch with, that's who we had dinner with, that's who we played with, that's who we competed against. Everything was about family. And then our mother's family lived up here. They would drive down. We were just beyond Elaine, about 6 miles beyond Elaine. So our mother's family would drive down and spend time with us too. They'd show up on Sundays, everybody would be surprised. It was always a big hello and a lot of shouting and a lot of screaming and laughing and fun, and then a lot of food. So yeah, so it was that was the only outlet we had. We had no money for any outside activity, so family was basically it. And then we had to create, because there was always so many of us, we always had our own baseball team, our own, whatever we needed to have played as children. There were always enough children to do that with. And plus, we always had adventures looking for berries or looking for whatever we could find that was unusual. So it was just like basically Tom Sawyer's. At least for me it was.
Too.
Then there was church. That was the other outlet. So in the church there were a lot of elders.
Okay. What kind of church did you go to?
Baptist church.
Baptist. Okay.
Holy Dust, Savior, Lord, come get us, Jesus, don't leave us by the wayside, Jesus Baptist Church. Yeah, yeah, oh, it was beautiful. In fact, if you'd ever gone, for me, I never found a church like that. That's my excuse for not becoming a regular church member, is nothing could replace those experiences I had as a young child in church.
What were the important days like church? Were there like revival?
Revival, Easter, Mother's Day,
Children's Day, Father's Day.
They always created there was always some events for us to participate in church, because and Sunday, church was all day Sunday. And so then the next week's conversation was all about who wore what on Sunday, who did what. So everything sort of evolved around church.
Nice. Did the church also sponsor like cultural celebrations, or it was mainly church?
Well, one of our aunts was always organizing children's activities in church. But they were basically religious events. She didn't do any, and we didn't celebrate, outside of religious events. It seemed that she had Children's Day, which I don't know anybody celebrated in those days. Then I can say there was Mother's Day, Father's Day. Every day everything that she could think of, she had a celebration around it. But there was no black activity.
No support from the church.
No, yeah, it was pretty much our aunt.
Because I was wondering if y'all had celebrated, like say, an emancipation,
No,
or anything like that.
no. Race was rarely mentioned in our home. We grew up totally devoid of any. I did. The only thing I remember my father saying was he didn't really dislike white people. They just had everything, and that was just the end of. I mean, I don't even know how that conversation evolved, but there was never any discussions of race in our around us.
Right.
Because when the adults had discussions, we had to go outside and play. So we were not really privy to adult conversations.
It's a lot different than it is now, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'm sure our parents must have discussed race, but like I say, we were dismissed. You were kicked out.
Now, you mentioned going to work as a young girl. What about like early experiences with school?
Well, we, as black children, school started for us in November, December. But so we had to work in the fields picking cotton from whenever it started up until school, the week when they could pick no longer, which was in November. So yeah, so I was a good enough student where I made it until I got to the 10th grade. When I got to 10th grade, when I got to school in September, they were taking geometry and algebra. Yeah, November, geometry and algebra. Of course, I never caught up, but I kept trying. Then when I went to the 11th grade, when I got to school in November, they were speaking French. And that's when I decided I needed to switch schools because I was too embarrassed to be that far behind. And I couldn't just catch up to speaking French like that. So I never learned to speak French. So that's when I changed schools. And that's when my whole life diverged from that point.
Okay. How did it diverge?
Well, I talked my parents into allowing me to go stay with my grandmother to go to school. And she lived in a different part of Arkansas that is pretty much alpine and all mills. So there was no cotton there. And by that time, my mother there were like 9 or 10 children. And I was just tired of the children, I was becoming a rebellious teen. So I wanted to go live with my grandmother, and they agreed to let me go. So I was 16, so I went to Fordyce with my grandmother, so I enrolled in high school there. And there, I just fell right in. I caught right up that they were not taking. The only thing that I couldn't do there was take chemistry, because I didn't have the background for chemistry. But as I found out, girls are not allowed to take chemistry anyway. So there were no barriers. All those barriers were removed, so I just fell right into high school there. So that worked well.
Excellent. And you had, can you talk about your experiences growing up as a young girl, and then were they similar to your, or?
Basically, it was similar to the way Faye grew up. We grew up in Rachel, Arkansas, chopping and picking cotton, moved from plantation to plantation, and life was hard, but we were happy. Is that my phone? And when she left to move with our grandmother, we moved to a place called Snow Lake, which is like the end of
The state.
the state, Desha County, 20 miles below Elaine, 40. And I attended a four-room schoolhouse. And they had the 9th, the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade all in one room. And our teacher, the school was named after her, Miss Carrie I. King. And she taught all 9, 10, 11, 12. So we had to sit in the classroom. There was only like 2 people in the 10th, 2 people in the 12th, 3 or 4 in the 11th, like that. So you sat in on all the classes, and you did pick up on certain things that happened there. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because the schools here in Elaine and Helena were, I should say Elaine, were very kind of competitive. And you didn't, if you were not an A student or a C or a D student, maybe a B, you kind of got left behind a little bit. They just promoted the smarter kids, and I was one of the kids that sort of got left behind. But when we moved to Snow Lake, Miss Carrie I. King and the other teachers took special interest in us, and we were able to thrive.
It sounds like she was a great teacher.
She was. She taught Latin, she taught French, she taught algebra, she taught everything. So from Snow Lake, we were able to thrive and do better. And that's when I sort of, got on the...
Took an interest in learning.
And learning.
Nice.
Yeah.
Were you having to work at Snow Lake also? Like still working in cotton?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Picked a lot of...
Yeah, there was never a time if you were home that you didn't work. I mean, our mother was going to say she was a steel driver. You had to work. We had to... The one thing that my mother did that I always loved and appreciated was whenever a child was born, and they were always born at home, they'd bring us all in the next day. We all came into the bedroom, and we were introduced to the child and told this child was our sister or brother, and that we had the responsibility to help feed it. So if you didn't want to go to the fields, aren't you going to go out and help your little sister or brother? And I always, as a young adult, resented that. But as I began to grow older, I began to appreciate how much she made us love each other and appreciate each other and become responsible for each other. So now I just see so much wisdom in that now. I didn't see it then. Yeah, we always was responsible for each other.
They say as we grow older, our parents grow wiser.
Yes, yes.
Do you remember other things that your parents or elders taught you as young girls growing up, like in terms of, the values they tried to instill in you? And
every day. Every day they had so many wise sayings that we used to laugh about, but now my father used to always say, laziness will kill you. And of course, we often joked about that, but now we know for a fact that, and I mean, my father was the disciplinarian, but we were his daughters, so he had a very difficult time disciplining us. But our mother didn't have any problem with it. So basically with our father, it was always conversations. I never forget one day he was plowing a mule, which is what he did. So I walked out to take him some water, and we would always sit down while he's having his water. We'd have those long conversations. And it was at that time that he introduced me to baseball. He asked me to listen to the games we didn't have a TV, listen to the games on the radio. And you tell me who did what, who made what home run, who made what, who did every aspect of the game. He taught me to listen for it. I didn't know that when he would go out with his buddies, he was bragging about what had happened as if he'd seen it. So I had to be real clear on who did what. And then also he was making bets. But but from him, I got this deep interest in baseball. And then the one thing he taught me about is being in control of your home. If he came home, when we finally got a TV, if he came home and we were watching something else and the baseball game was on, he would say, okay, I'm coming in for the TV. If you want to watch the game, you can stay in here. If not, you need to leave. So that's what he did. He would put us out. Oh no, go. I'm watching. The game is on TV. So, or the radio, he would commandeer whatever he needed to commandeer to get his needs met. So I learned how to do that from my father. If it's yours and you're in control, damn, you seize it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So and then in church he had a lot of church parables that he sort of lived by that he would pass on to us. I don't know if you can remember any of them, June. But they were full of wise sayings, and they were strict disciplinarians. We were not allowed to, if they caught you in a lie, or if you were caught stealing, I mean, we just were not allowed to do anything except be good kids. So we had to be good kids.
How did your family, because you had to move a lot, how did you deal with things like, healthcare, medical care?
It was it was at home. We had no doctors. The first time I went to a doctor, one of my brothers was playing out in the cotton field after they sprayed, and he got all kinds of sores in his head. So my mother put me and him on a bus to take him to Elaine to a doctor because she just couldn't manage it. My grandmother and mother both knew which plants in the fields healed. So if something happened to you that they grab you, come here, and they grab something and put it on you, you didn't even know what it was. And next day you'd be healed. So we were healthy children, thank God, and didn't need a lot of medicine. And I don't remember going to a doctor until I was probably an adult.
Do you remember any of those herbs or things that they did, like
I remember the
milkweed.
I remember the milkweed. I swear, every time I see a milkweed now, I stop and pay homage to it. Yeah, it's a weed. It snaps and it's got a lot of milk. And if you got a sore anywhere or any cut, a bruise, put it on there and it's gone.
Milkweed.
Those properties, yes.
We were trying to identify a plant across the street, and because I'm colorblind and I can't really tell colors that well. Can you all describe it?
It was that tall stalk with an orange
Flower coming out of it?
flower. I think it's a lily of some kind.
They're quite common in this area, and because they look beautiful now, but in the winter they get so raggedy. I didn't have an interest in them, just because in the winter they just look awful. They just stand there. They make your whole yard look real tacky. They're beautiful now, but come back in 6 months. Oh my God. Yes. Did you ever find out what they were?
No.
I think we may have a couple of them. And then not only that, if you put down one, a year later, you've got a whole, they're everywhere. So by winter, you got your whole yard looks just tacky. Yeah. So, but they are beautiful, and they come in different colors. They kind of remind me of flamingos for some reasons. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah. Can you pass that in?
This is so they can hear us.
Okay.
Put it in, plug it in.
There's one more.
So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more. You started to talk about going to school and moving around. What was your high school experience like around this area?
My high school experience was wonderful. I'd gone to middle school there were 4 of us, and we were always competing, and we were competing to be the best grade. So I always stayed in that group, that was like a study group, and we always made sure that we always got A's, because somehow my pride was tied to getting an A. So school for me was just open. It was just, I was a bookworm. And I was always looking for books, so school was the ideal place to be. So I loved every minute of it.
And what sort of subjects or things did you enjoy learning about the most?
As I look back, probably just reading in general. To be perfectly honest, biographies. I was always interested in biographies. So whatever biography I could get my hand on, yeah. And then one summer, we had the summer as a child, we had, the Russians were coming. So I became very interested in the Russians. And just so happens, my grandfather, who lived in Ohio, sent me some Reader's Digest. And so I fell in love with Reader's Digest because Reader's Digest has everything. There's vocabularies, there's stories, but it just so happened that the series that he sent me were all about the Russians. So then when people started fearing the Russians, I didn't, because I saw them through the eyes of the writers in those books. For me, they were always just standing in line waiting for bread and trying to get warm and trying not to snitch each other out. So that's how I got through the scare of the Russian bombing us, because one point in our lives, they built a lot of storm shelters for us, and then there was always the threat of a nuclear attack or an atomic attack. I don't know, I think it was a nuclear or atomic, I don't know, but so I never went through that fear. But to answer your question, biographies and Russian literature, Russian stories were my interest.
Ms. Jane, what about you?
High school wasn't that interesting to me. I dropped out in 11th grade and moved to Boston, and then I went to school at night to get my diploma, and then I started going to University of Northeastern University at night. But I never was really interested in school until I became an adult. I realized that I had to learn, so my job paid for my schooling, so I started going to school at night. But I was never really, as a high school, I was not that, wasn't good for me at all. Because you couldn't go every day, you were always behind, you couldn't have the clothes that you needed to wear, and it was just, we couldn't go to school unless it rained because we had to stay and, pick and chop cotton. And it was just not good to just go and sit in the classroom, teacher asks you something you don't know. So I didn't like it. That's when I picked up and left.
What was that experience like moving to Boston for the first time?
At first, it was kind of sad leaving the family, but then we got used to it. Yeah. That's when I began to thrive when I got to Boston, because people treated you differently. Everything was different. And I was fortunate enough to work for a company that cared, and they paid the tuition and child care and all stuff like that. So, yeah.
So what specifically brought you out to Boston?
Getting away from poverty, trying to make a better life for myself, tired of chopping and picking cotton. So I have a twin sister, so she and I both boarded the bus and went to Boston. We were live-in maids. That's how we got to Boston. Mm-hmm. Live-in maids. They send for you and you pay them back over a certain time. And you live in we were living in with Jewish families. She was living with one family and I was living with another. And you work with the family and every day until we ran off, and then we got our own place.
And what year did you first move out to Boston? What year?
1966. I moved to Boston.
And how long were you there?
43 years.
Oh.
I have a quick question. I'm very interested on genealogy, the history of family. My question is regarding how far have you tried to see how far does your family that you're able to get information from? If so, does it begin with your grandpa? You said, your grandpa lived in Ohio, but did he move from Arkansas, or how did your family arrive to Arkansas first?
Okay, just in terms of grandpas, most of our grandpas were just sort of, we don't know.
You don't know.
They would say they were our grandpas, but our grandmothers, we can talk about those in great details.
Okay, let's hear that. Okay,
now, we've got one grandmother that we've got a picture of her in the book from Remember 2019 that was born in 1853. Okay. So so on both sides of our family, on our dad's side, we have lots of pictures and lots of family history. Our maternal grandmother was born in Mississippi, her and her family. It was the one in 1853, I think, after she was freed from slavery, went looking for her family, and I think she landed in Mississippi, and eventually they landed in Arkansas, down at Elaine, Arkansas, where she had about 4 or 5 kids. And so they left Elaine, Arkansas, and moved to Chicago. Now, our grandmother stayed around this area and had my mother and her children. So that's how we got here. On our father's side, our father's family were from Jefferson County, Arkansas, which is Rising, Arkansas is the name of it. They, from what we're told, now the story of him, this is another grandfather, that he was on a slave ship and that was anchored in the Bay of South Carolina. This could be our romantic slavery stuff that we invent, we don't know. But he jumped ship and he came inland to Arkansas. And on the way here, he married a 12-year-old Indian girl, and they had 12 children. Now, we do have pictures of her as an older woman on the wall, and they had 12 children. That's my paternal grandmother, that's where, she's the one, but they all moved to a place called Rising, Arkansas. And then I guess about 1935, they decided to come to the Delta. So they all came to Delta. My uncle and I guess the whole family moved to this part of it. But the grandfather that lived in Ohio, we're not sure if he was a soldier or how but he didn't stay here his family, we don't know much about him or his families. June and I don't. We have a sister who has the whole family history. She's done all the research through whatever avenues she can, but we're pretty much limited. But that's how we came here, was from Mississippi and South Carolina.
All right. Building off on that, let me see. I wanted to come back because I noticed that you were saying that you mentioned that you moved out in 1966 to Boston.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah.
That's her son.
Okay.
Okay, so what was the question? Oh, you want to ask the
I'm
question?
in a meeting right now.
I can get close to both, but
Oh,
good.
okay.
Yes.
This is going back to the event. I wanted to talk, we just finished with Elaine.
I don't know, in an hour, a couple
I want
hours.
to talk a little bit about that and those experiences because you were
Huh?
at that point, like from what I've seen and understanding.
What's wrong?
So I want to see what was
And Elaine?
Elaine.
Okay.
Well, I'll call you
During
back.
you mean?
Call me back
the
in an
incident
hour.
and everything that.
You know,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest with you,
All right.
I was in an English literature class at Northeastern University in Boston, and our professor told us about Ernest Hemingway. So he said that Richard Wright, about this black writer, Richard Wright was as famous as Ernest Hemingway. I don't even know how that conversation came up in class, but I went to the library at Northeastern to look up Richard Wright, and that's when I found about the Elaine massacre. As children, we never knew anything at all about that. We were not told, and we were told that because our parents didn't want to teach us to hate, that we were not told. So most of us found out about the massacres through literature. I found out through literature, and then I found out Ida B. Wells Barnett, and I just became and almost flunked English Lit because I got hung up on Richard Wright reading his books, and then I got caught up in the massacre of 1919.
How did it make you feel once you found out all that information? What did you get, like emotion?
Well, the emotion I got is the emotion that I always get is what we have come through and the contributions that we have made in this country and how so many industries rest on our backs and the contributions that we have. I mean, we created the entertainment industry. So when I think of all the strife and all the kinds of challenges that we've had as a group of people, to have come through that and to have done what we have done, it just gives me power and strength. It makes me not acknowledge racism when I see it. So it causes me, when people try to approach me racially, that I have tense words for them. So I don't buy into white superiority because I've never seen it. I'm 75 years old and I've never seen any incidences of white superiority. So having had that experience reading Ida B. Wells Barnett and Richard Wright told me that I didn't have any, that I stood on, that Black was not a brand, that was not a color of cowardice, that it was an act of courage, and that we didn't have any reason to be ashamed in this country, nothing to back down from. So from that, I had lived in Las Vegas, and in Las Vegas, it was interesting because I'd seen racism up close, but I'd also seen it in every other area group. So I began to understand that it wasn't just me, and it wasn't the groups, that it was the individual who was projecting, and it was his lack of selfness that caused him to act out, that it wasn't me. So that's what it gave me. It gave me, it ain't me, it ain't my folks, it's you. It's you and your shit. Somebody threw some dog shit on you in the playground when you were 5 years old. That's on you. That is not on me. So it caused me to be a strong woman in my racism. It caused me, because I lived in Las Vegas. When I left my little town in Rising, I went to Las Vegas. And there it was a different kind of racism. There were, in Las Vegas in the 60s, the Mormons controlled everything. They controlled all the jobs, everything. So if you wanted to get through and get a better paying job, you had to get with the Mormons. So everybody hated the Mormons. So I saw it just wasn't Black racism, that people hated whoever they thought kept them from getting to the next level. So I could see it from a lot of different perspectives. And then I got a chance to work in a hotel, and I learned that when you are with whatever group you spend the most time with is a group that you create the most ideas about, positive or negative. So that sort of shaped and it allowed me to come back here and to live in this environment and to deal with whatever little slights that people here would try. Most of them are the most wonderful folks in the whole world here. But occasionally you run into some idiot who tries to marginalize you. So it helps, for me, it helps because I always try to respond intellectually. It don't always work. Sometimes the ghetto will come up, but for the most part, it's managed and it's in a little container. So to answer your question, I just really thought about that when you asked me, so I'm probably babbling.
I was thinking, moving towards that, Emmett Till, 1955. I
remember that.
And it's not too far from the area.
No.
What happened? What was the scene around here when that occurred? Or
it was just, I remember my folks and I were downtown. I remember looking across the river thinking, because he was the same age as me. And I kept wondering, how could anybody be that cruel? So I started thinking, what would make anybody be that cruel to another human being, especially a 13-year-old child? I just couldn't imagine that level of cruelty. So for me, it's always been about cruelty. And then about 5 years ago, my sister and I went down to Money, Mississippi. Well, we got the whole story of Emmett Till, how they beat him and dragged him from place to, and then I thought the cruelest part of the Emmett Till story is the jury. The 12 men and women said, it's okay for you to beat a 12-year-old child like that. So again, I began to see it through the lens of just cruelty and inhumanity. That you could actually take something and put somebody's eyes out, that you could actually do that to another human being. The only thing I can kill is a fly or a roach. So I just can't imagine killing a human being. And then once you kill them, that you would just do the body like that? What is missing in you that would allow you to do that? Where is your humanity? What happened to you? And that's what I say about the rioters, the folks who stormed the Capitol. What is missing in you that allow you to act like that? Where is your humanity? Didn't your mother I have some white friends when I first came here, and we used to talk about, I said, the difference between white kids and black kids is that we were nursed. Our families breastfed us. That's the difference. You were not breastfed. That's why you're so angry and filled with hatred, because you were not breastfed. So it began to, so when I think about all that, I begin to think about how empty people are and how hurt and angry they are and what causes all that hurt and anger. Because for me, if you can do that, it doesn't speak about the person you're victimizing. To me, you're the victim. Because you can actually be that inhumane to some, you just lack humanity. So how do you do that? I don't know.
Just speaking of, you were talking earlier about your grandmother who was born in slavery, and then when emancipation came, she went to search for her family.
Yes.
Can you talk more about that? Can you hear more about that?
You know, that's pretty much all we know, all I know about that. She didn't find her family, but she had one daughter and created her own family. She never found the rest of her family as far as we know.
Wow.
Yeah.
They've been sold away from her by the...
They were moved from
plantation to plantation, yeah.
And they lost track.
Yeah.
Yeah, even moved to other states.
Yeah.
She just didn't know. She searched for a long time, but she never found them.
We've read, ads in newspapers, in black newspapers from, the 1880s or 1890s of, people, searching for family members lost during slavery.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've got a letter written from one of my father's uncles in 1873. He'd moved to Florida. They were the O'Neills. They'd moved to Florida. He was writing about what he'd done since he'd been in Florida, the kind of crops he was raising it. Because the letter is very difficult to read. It seems that he just learned to write, and he was writing all this perfect penmanship. And he sort of looked like he was drunk and kind of got carried away. But that's what it looks like to me. But yeah, so they were scattered everywhere. And with our great grandmother, great was 7 generations back, I guess she searched, couldn't find them. So then she created her own family.
Did your elders ever talk about slavery times?
No.
Never. We would have known that we had been in slavery except we found it out in school. We didn't know. Slavery what? We didn't know anything about that. Yeah. Luckily, I took Negro history in high school, so that's how I knew about it. But even at that, there were no discussions about what I learned in school at home around that topic. I think it was just so painful for them. You were going to say?
Nothing. I'll leave it out.
Yeah, we had no idea.
I know you had talked a little earlier about your experience in the church and how you were never able to find that sense of community in another church and any other community that you've been a part of. So I kind of want to hear more about those experiences and what made them so impactful on you and maybe on your family as well.
Well, mine is sort of an ego trip. My aunt always picked me to do the welcome. So no matter what happened in church, I always played a major role. So it was a chance for me just to show off show off whatever skills I had. Didn't have any, but it gave me a chance to be on stage, and I always liked that. So and then church meant everybody come together, you listen to the prayer, and of course there was always a critique of who prayed, because I don't know if you've ever been to an old black church. If you haven't, it's an experience that you have to have. And it's for me, and it's still today, it's rather theatrical. So I was there, so it was our entertainment as well as our enrichment. So for me, and then at one point, we had a minister who was, then the Bible for me was so controversial just because I found the stories so improbable. And so I got to discuss those topics with my aunts, and they would always just shut you down and tell you, well, it's God, and you don't understand God. But so church, I guess church became a point of entertainment, enrichment, and curiosity for me, if that makes sense. Yeah. I always enjoyed the sermons. We always looked up and got really great preachers. And then some of the rituals I found, I guess to be perfectly honest, church has always been entertaining for me because we didn't have anything else. It was just because some of the folks in church, some of the way they came to church or presented church or acted in church. Because you could see a lot of egos on display in church. You can see a lot of courting rituals. You can see people, if you were attuned, you could just see everything going on in church.
And is that a common sentiment between you and the rest of your siblings, or is that kind of like a you thing?
You know what? We all have, it's amazing in one family that we all have different church experiences and different church beliefs. We have one sister who's a Jehovah's Witness. We have our brother next door is I guess, what would you call him, a Black Power? He's sort of out there. And then we have one sister who just embraces every philosophy there is, depending on who she's with. So in our family, there's no one thread of religious belief. I guess would be the most honest way to answer that question.
You mentioned your brother's next door. Is the rest of your family and your other siblings still in the area, or did other people move out?
Well, no, there's just the three of us here, and my sister and my sister went to Boston, so my brother was there too as a young man, and I went to Las Vegas as a young woman. So we all just moved back to the area. I came back because my grandmother was here, and she was the center of us getting together and meetings. And when she died, we were losing that. And I didn't want to lose that. I wanted always to know where my cousins were and to be in contact with them. And I found not knowing my second cousins, my third cousins, a sense of loss. So I came back to reconnect, and we have. And it's just been fantastic. On any given day, a cousin will pop up from someplace that you've not seen in 10 or 15 years, or his brother or cousin or child. So now we're grandparents and great-grandparents, so this has become like the hub for us to keep the family tied together as much as possible. And then it's both sides, our daddy's family and our mother's family, so yeah. So that's kind of why we're back.
Why did you start working with the Elaine Legacy Center, and what does that mean to both of you?
Well, I started working because of Dr. Olson. And particularly because of Dr. Olson. I mean, for a woman her age, she puts so much into Elaine that it almost seemed like sacrilege not to help out. I mean, she gets up in the morning at 6 o'clock, she's down there at 7. She's pretty much put the community on her back, and she's trying to go forward with it. So I tried to help her. And that's oh my, and that's my interest in Elaine, is helping Dr. Olson. And then I tried to be a role model, just to model what's possible for the folks in Elaine, but that was met with scorn, and so I just stepped back and okay, I'll help Dr. So I'm just there strictly to help Dr. Olson.
And how did you first meet Dr. Olson?
Oh, that's another interesting story. She had a bookstore. She was opening a bookstore down on Cherry Street the first year I moved here. So I just sort of stopped by the bookstore, and there she was. And I met this little man. And he told me, this little guy told me, was working on the house, told me to go down there. So I went down there, and there she was. So I met her. And then I went fishing, broke my leg. And I went there one day, and she offered me a job. And I needed the job as a AmeriCorps volunteer because I need the additional help with the insurance. I didn't realize how lacking my insurance was until I started getting those co-pays. So I took the job as a volunteer, AmeriCorps volunteer. and I worked in there for 2 years. And I found her to be such a delightful person to work with and such a committed human being.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience at the Elaine Center?
We go down when there are events, or we try to help out when there are events. And we certainly try to, like I say, do everything we can to help make the event successful. So that's pretty much our attachment to that. At least that's mine. It's just trying to make whatever events she has successful.
June, what does the Elaine Legacy Center mean to you? How did you get involved?
I got involved with my sister.
Okay.
So every time she goes, she asks me if I want to go.
Okay.
So I go. And I like going to Elaine sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I went to high school there. So I don't know quite a few people there. So yeah, that's my involvement.
How do you see throughout the years the landscape has changed? How has the landscape changed? Is it more people? Is it more friendly? Or is it the same? Or it's still like the same as you left from years
No, it
ago?
has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's only
Dramatically.
like 300 people, 300, 400 people there. And when I was there, it was thriving.
And how does that make you feel?
It's sad. I would hopefully that it will come back.
You think it will?
To see, I don't know. It's just sad to see that it has gone down like that.
And plus, we represent another generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now there's another generation there. So we know the folks that are there now, they're not our classmates, they're pretty much our classmates' children. So you have to make those contacts. So yeah, it's not easy because it's another generation. And all the landmarks that we recognize are pretty much gone.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about that? Like what type of landmarks would you say?
Well, there were certain stores that were there. We were there. There were certain hangouts. But we have some great memories.
Movie theaters. Name of the town, like little towns on down the road. They've taken down all the signs, and you don't even recognize it anymore.
That was my first act of racial defiance was in the movie theater in Elaine. Now, we didn't know, somebody took us to the movies, and we could only sit in the balcony, the best seats. So as a person in the balcony, we would take popcorn and chewing gum and all kinds of things. We just throw them down on the white people. So they come out of the theater. That's what Elaine's remind me of. My first incidents of racial defiance was. Yeah. We had the best seats, and they would come down with a flashlight. Like, y'all better stop throwing stuff. Who, us? No. We have grapes and whatever we've eaten, we throw it right down on them.
Based on that, what you're saying, those changes, it seems like a lot of it has changed. I guess what I want to ask is, those places are what built the community, and now we're losing that community. That community's not there. And who do you think is at fault? Do you think it's just capitalism? I don't know. I mean, that's what I want to find out. Who do you blame? Just people trying to move to another place because of resources, or is it structural? Mechanical, technology. They've improved farming. They don't need farm workers anymore. So there's nobody really to blame. I mean, it's just, it's like blaming the horse and buggy when the car came. Times change, things change. We just move forward. Now it would be wonderful. I'm 75, so I would not expect to go down to see anybody that I grew up with, because they're all dead and gone. So that's another aspect of it. Times change. Times don't wait. We move on. But I would have hoped that the people there would have become, or somehow they would have become more conscious of the need for wealth, or find ways to create wealth. But then I had to realize that that's not what that is. As a matter of fact, there's an old saying, folks with anything going in Elaine got up and went. So if you had anything going, you got up and left. So it was never a place for, so when we were children, there was not a lot of creativity going on there. Everybody was just sort of relying on the crops and everybody was just kind of getting by. So now that that's gone, you no longer have that. You have to go someplace else where you can get by. Yeah.
Do you feel like those decisions to mechanize and all those factors that led to people leaving Elaine were made by people you consider members of the community, or people you didn't really feel like you saw hanging around?
No, ask me that question again.
Do you feel like those policy decisions were made by people you consider a part of your community, or people you don't consider a part of your
No,
community?
they were made outside of us. Most of the decisions about this part of the country are made outside. We're not even considered. They're made because pretty much this part of the country is controlled by big farmers, and their primary interest is getting their farms to market, and you're just a cog in that wheel. So if you're not functioning to help them get the crops in, you're null and void. You have absolutely no value. So that's what we realized, that our value was in getting the crops in, and that was our only value. You had no value to them as a human being. So if a tractor could do it, or whatever could replace productivity or increase productivity was what was used. So that for me, there was never any emotions attached to that. That's just what it had been. That's just the way of the world.
So I want to hear more about your work. Elaine, you said earlier that the way you wanted to model for the community sometimes was met and faced with like scorn. So I want to hear more about that and what your experiences are like. Do you feel like you're not as welcoming before, or as welcome as before in Elaine? If you want to just talk more about that.
Well, I don't know that I'm not as welcomed. And it could have been me pushing my way of life, or the way I was thinking down people's throats, which doesn't bode well either. I just wanted folks to know that Elaine, that was not the end of the world. That if you worked hard and you tried to be, if you had goals and you were willing to put forth an effort, you could reach those goals. Because my sister and I, we're always othered. So when people see us, the first thing they say to us, "Oh, y'all ain't from here." And at first it was annoying. And then it became downright, I used to anger, because I'm saying, okay, so you can't be a black person who use good English and be from Arkansas. You can. So don't minimize yourself. You can be whatever you want to be. So I saw in that statement, "Y'all ain't from here, are you?" a minimization of people who are from here, that you can't be from here, and whatever they saw us,
Walk and talk.
Yeah, and walk and talk with, "Oh, y'all have accents." Well, I do not have an accent. I don't even have a dialect. But just because you're from here does not mean that you can't speak good English. It does not mean that you can't learn. And that's the message I was getting. But I start to feel, oh, you're getting a little hostile, you better back down. So I just stopped putting any value in it. I thought, okay, just smile and keep going. But white folks always say, "Y'all ain't from here, are you? Y'all got an accent." I said, "You the one with the accent." That's an accent. I don't have an accent. Yeah. "Well, y'all ain't from here." Yes, we are. "Well, y'all don't talk like y'all from here." Yes, we do. So yeah. So it was that kind of othering. I felt othered. So then I began to appreciate what being othered felt like. It's a gut punch, really. Yeah.
I was wondering, for both of you, we were talking sort of about the shift in generations, like a younger generation is growing up anyway, and in this area right now. Just kind of, if you could share your thoughts on that generation, their engagement levels with the community, or other things that they're interested in, and sort of the trajectory that you see their work in the community going.
I'm an eternal optimist. I don't see what I'd like to see there now, but I just believe that out of that morass, some great artists will arrive, or something great will come out of some of those children. I don't see in them what I would like to see in children in terms of being disciplined, but I realize that may not be what they need. What I had may not necessarily be the formula for success. So I'm the eternal optimist. I would like to see a better focus on education. but they don't have a high school down there or a school, so that can't be. I would like to see, what I would really want to see would be a better focus on health. People seem to me to be grossly unhealthy, and that's bothersome, especially the children are fat, and not just fat, but big pot guts. And for me, that doesn't bode well. But again, the eternal optimists say all that will correct itself in time.
I have a question. Going back, I guess, to the early 1900s, you know, this was a community, Elaine was a community that African Americans, black people strive. They owned the property, they owned the land, it was their land. And then what happened, you know, the massacre came in, intimidation tactics, that land was removed, was sold, sometimes it was not intentional, but sometimes, you know, they threatened them, people got threatened, felt threatened. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about, like, you know, the community on its own is thriving? You're talking about, we went to the theaters, there used to be so much action going on, and it just sort of like vanished slowly but surely. And how do you feel?
You know, I would feel angry, except it happened all over the South. Elaine was just one place. It happened in so many other places. Now, I am bothered that people could again, I'm back to my cruelty tree, that people could take what you have and burn you at the stake and sit and watch it and have a sandwich. That kind of human being, I question their humanity. So for me, it's a whole thing about looking at what human beings are capable of. And then I read, I got Dr. Frankl, and you see what happened in concentration. In fact, a short story, there was a gentleman who was sent to the concentration camp in Germany. They lived in this one little community in Germany, and he survived. And he had, before they were sent to the concentration camp, him and his wife had saved money. They bought this most beautiful piano. It was a piano to die for. So he survives the concentration camp. He comes back, and he goes to his neighbor's house, who's white, who's German rather, and he looks in their living room, and there's his piano. Well, the neighbor is denying anything about the Holocaust. He doesn't know what happened. Where have you been? He doesn't know anything. So the guy says, well, you know, I think that's my piano in your living room. And the German says, oh, no, it's not. So the guy leaves, and he says, that's my piano. That's about all I got left in memories of my family. So he calls the authorities. And the authorities show up, and the German is just adamant. At this point, he's red, and he's yelling and screaming, that's not your piano. Long story short, the guy says, well, you know, before the wife and I were taken to the concentration camps, we put our family pictures inside that piano. So the cop goes over, and they open the piano, and there are the family pictures.
Wow.
So I tell that story because if I thought that only cruelty happened in America, remember, I'm a biography reader, so cruelty seems to be a part of the human experience. But but to be up close to it is a different story. I was never up closer to it than I was in Elaine, where you've actually visited the sites where cruelty takes place.
Because the story that you just shared was from Viktor Frankl, and the book has just been republished.
Yeah.
I'm blanking the name. I read it when I was in college. It was so incredible.
Isn't that an incredible book?
It is, and kind of as you're talking, I was thinking about the work of, again, Richard Wright, Toni Morrison, what kind of impact they've had on our culture. It's incredible.
You know, and the Richard Wright's impact on me was, in his story, A Black Boy, I think it was Black Boy, the first book, he showed me in that book, through his character in Bigger Thomas, what daily acts of humility can do to you if you don't buttress your self-esteem and buttress yourself. That because of daily acts of inhumanity toward him, he was able to kill the young woman. Now, so I was determined that I would never suffer daily acts of humility, because I see how it could destroy you and destroy your soul and destroy who you were. So that's what I got. So that's what I see in Elaine is those daily acts of humility could not destroy us. Nothing done to us in this country has destroyed us. I think in this country and in the world, the African American experience is an experience of greatness. I mean, there's no other people in history that since of any history that I've read who have gone through what we've gone through and still survived as a group and still survived. And not only that, while we're surviving, we gave the world jazz, we gave the world food, we gave the world dance, we gave the world basketball. Look at what we've given the world. So for me, all of that is just in our history. I don't take little events like not to minimize the event, Elaine, but it's just another day on the cross. So when we come off the cross, we come off creating. We are the most creative people in the world. I mean, just to have some, I took a Atlantic trip to West Africa. My brother said to me, please don't go at the bottom of the ship and tie yourself up. I didn't, but I caught the worst cold that you could ever catch. Now, I'm in a stateroom on the ship, and I barely survived. So I'm thinking, if I had been in the bottom, I wouldn't have survived. So I got a feel for that of what it takes to survive a transatlantic voyage on a ship. It ain't for the weak of heart. And then I have to know that a lot of folks went crazy because you would lose your mind if you were tied up under those circumstances. So again, it all of the experiences that I've had being a black woman and watching our black experiences is just strengthened my resolve that I know who we are. We are a tough, tough people. We are built. Another short story. A friend of mine is a Muslim, black Muslim. So he goes to Indonesia. He's invited for a conference. And he says there's like 30 million people at the conference. And he says his host introduced him as the only survivor of slavery in Indonesia. So yeah, so we have stories. I think our stories are stories of humanity, of human survival. I think our stories are stories of what's possible for human beings.
What have been some of the other writers? You mentioned Richard Wright, Victor Frankl. What have been some of the other writers who have inspired you over the years?
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King. What kind of impact did Dr. King have? Thinking back, in the 50s and 60s, all the experiences he went through, and then all of a sudden there's this younger man, Dr. Martin Luther King. Do you remember when you first learned about him?
I don't remember when I first learned about him, but it seems like all the things that he talked about and preached about and wrote about is happening right now. It's like nothing has really changed, especially with the voting situation here. And it just that, I don't know.
Well, I first saw, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I first saw Dr. King now I grew up in the era when they had the Little Rock School, that event. And then when I saw Dr. King on TV when I was 12 years old, I remember how people were reacting to him. And I remember one of the first classes I had as a teacher, I had a young girl was discussing Dr. King, young white girl. She said, my father thinks he's awful, but I've come to appreciate him. So it gave me a different outlook on, So I always appreciated what he was trying to do, and I watched him grow up, and then I watched how he was vilified.
Yeah.
And then I come to Mississippi and I see a Dr. Martin Luther King drive. I thought, oh my God, Mississippi, goddamn.
And we had
Nina Simone, yeah.
We had discussions in high school about Dr. King, and some of the kids were saying that he was a deviant and he was this and he was that, but there was on both sides, people had different opinions about what he was doing and what he was saying.
My Martin Luther King was Frederick Douglass. Now that to me is the most underappreciated human being in the world.
How did you first learn about Frederick Douglass?
I took Negro history as a young woman, but I came to appreciate him in a book by David Bright, that I've read 3 times, because I didn't know all of his achievements were not listed. Now, when I look at what he did as a young man and as an older man, and I look back on that, he's the most incredible human being in American history. When he died, he was the most traveled American. Not the most traveled Black American, but the most traveled American. And his book, the way the author must have fallen madly in love with him, because the way he nuanced Douglass's experience is just overwhelming. That Frederick Douglass and his son are responsible for baseball in America. They created all these, there's so many, and then he was a photographer. I mean, he had so many talents. And to have done what he did in his lifetime is just absolutely, and then I read that wherever he went, women swooned and fainted. I guess he looked something like Obama.
Sojourner Truth was another one.
Yeah, married me Lloyd Bethune, but Frederick Douglass was probably the most of the writers that I read. Or Howard Thurman is probably the most influential writer Black writer that I read.
Jesus and the Disinherited.
Oh, I got that. That's By the Bedside. Yeah, that's a powerful book, isn't it?
It is.
And especially today, when you think about Christians supporting Trump, you're thinking, wait a minute. You're not Howard Thurman's Christians. Yeah.
The thing that amazed me about him,
Florida,
and how he learned his Christianity was from his
grandmother.
who was
Yes.
a slave.
Yes.
And people would say, "Oh, you must have read so many books," and he said, "Well, yeah, I have, but
Yeah.
the most important things I learned from my grandmother, who
Yes.
never learned how to read or
Right.
write. He had to read the Gospels to her, but she refused to allow him to read
Paul.
Exactly.
Why is that?
Well,
Yeah.
slaves obey thy master.
Yeah.
She said that's all the masters allowed us to
read.
learn.
Yeah.
So I'm not having that.
Yeah. The Epistle Paul. Yeah.
But, did you ever have a kind of reading or know, because you mentioned the Little Rock Nine kind of earlier, like Daisy Bates?
I lived through that.
Yeah.
Here in Arkansas, as a 12-year-old child. I remember all that being on TV. I remember that being the buzz. Mm-hmm. So I remember the 12. I remember the 12 kids. I mean, the kids going to school. And you know what? I remember how those white women stood outside those children, and the look on their faces. They were frothing at the mouth. Their anger. And I thought, what is wrong with these people? And none of them were going to school. None of them had any kids in school. I couldn't figure out what was that about. So we watched that. So it just caused me to go into a deep sense of what is wrong with these people? How are they so able to hate so deeply and so quickly and about something so insignificant?
And then it kind of connects to what you're saying earlier about the January 6th, the insurrection.
Yes.
In D.C.
Yes.
Have you come up with any theories?
James
Baldwin.
Baldwin.
Yeah.
But Baldwin is credited so much with the white-black superiority theory. And Baldwin is often quoted when people say, well, the white man he may not be anything, but he ain't black. He can look. And then I got another book that I just got that says that came about, that's only half the story. That came about because of the insurrections in the Caribbeans, where white people were getting their asses kicked and getting kicked out of there, and they came to America poor and down and out. And the moneyed class said to them, okay, so now you're white, and here's some money, and here's some land, and you're better than them. But Baldwin tells the story is, you're white, you're better than them. But is you're white, you got land, you're better than them. So Baldwin and I have some issues because he didn't tell the whole story. And unfortunately, that part of the story is the one that got the most traction. Yeah.
But without the economics.
You're just the unwashed, is what Trump calls it, his following. You're just the unwashed. Yeah. But, yeah.
Well, that was the thing about the January 6th insurrection is a lot, people assume from the outside, oh, these are a bunch of poor white people.
No, they were
They
not.
had a lot of money to make it from the West Coast,
Yeah.
and a lot of them were pretty, and they've been finding a lot of them were professionals.
Yeah, a lot of them, yeah.
People, but angry.
But there was
What are they so angry about? That's the thing.
that's what I couldn't figure out. And then found out half of them didn't even
Because
vote.
he lost the election.
Yeah, but come on. I went to get a mammogram. So me and this big white lady, I'm 5'9", and I'm looking up, she's about 6'1" or 6'2". And I said, well, let me get back and watch the news. She said, oh, ain't nothing on the news. I said, well, did you see the man who was in Nancy Pelosi's office with his foot up on the table with some Arkansas? I said, and when did people from Arkansas, men especially, get to disrespect women like that? We don't get to call an 80-year-old white woman a F and B. She said, well, Nancy Pelosi tore up President Trump's speech. That was disrespectful. I said to you better get your little silly ass out of here because girlfriend is with them. But I just couldn't imagine any man calling an 80-year-old woman a F and B. We don't do that. When do we get to that level? And I mean, the one thing we always had was respect for our elders. I thought, but she was okay with that. I thought, okay, all right.
No, I just want to talk. I guess we're just having conversations. Let's just keep it kind of like, I guess, conversational.
Okay.
Let's have it more conversational.
Okay.
Like here a little bit. I wanted to, well, before we go, I kind of wanted to get a sense of, you have a lot of decorations in here, and not just any type of decorations. Very activist, very you have your thoughts well in check. I was wondering if you could kind of give us a little synopsis of what's going on around us, or where did you came with it, the idea of getting all these types of painting, or how do you build that? How do you build on it?
To be perfectly honest, I had a fire in my apartment. So my girlfriend and I went looking for art. And the one piece that we had, of course we went to some cheap store, and the one piece that was there was this white woman sitting in a meadow looking rather, rather serene. So my other girlfriend, I was going to buy it. She said, you really going to put that on your wall? Do you know what you put? So I started thinking about it. I don't know. So I did it. So then I started looking for black art. And just as I started looking for black art, a friend of mine opened a black art gallery in Las Vegas. So I started buying it every time I got a tip or some discretionary funds, I started buying art. Then the next thing you know, I got my little house won't accommodate it. There's no place on the walls to put anything. So I got a bigger house. Same thing happened. It just got to the point where I could not refuse a piece of art. And every time I'd go someplace, that's what I'd look for. I'd find art. So most of it, and then there's some pieces I got, they're not in here. I went to a conference in San Diego, my pieces, and a guy had them out of the back of a car. But we flew down, and I knew I couldn't fly those back on the airplane. So a month later, I went to another conference, and there he was, and I'd driven, so I bought them. So most of it's just picking up stuff that you see here and there that you think needs a lovely home. Of course, that piece back there, the Egyptian piece, I got that in Egypt. Some of it I got in my travels. I got a few pieces that I got in Dakar. And I got a couple of ivory pieces that I smuggled out of the Ivory Coast, and I was scared to death the whole way. So it all comes from places I've traveled or secondhand stores that I've gone into and found it like that. What is this doing here?
Okay. One other question before we move on, then I'll pass it down. I wanted to know if, I guess this is for the next generations that will probably be working with these interviews. What book would you recommend for them to begin like searching for the truth? Do you have like a recommendation?
It could be a list.
It's a list, but you personally felt like, wow, this inspired me. Like,
I would say Frederick Douglass, the story of Frederick Douglass.
Fantastic.
I would say that if you enter there, you can't go wrong because you capture so many years of history in Frederick Douglass.
Okay.
By David Blight, I want to.
I just wanted to know, what is your favorite part about living in this area of Arkansas? What keeps you here?
The landscape. I find it so incredibly beautiful. There's nothing more beautiful than walking out and looking out of the window at all that greenery and all that. And then everything blooms here. You should be here in the springtime. Oh my God. Oh, it's heaven on earth. It's so, I mean, there's trees around here with purple flowers on them. It is absolutely beautiful. So I would say that would be my attraction to the area.
Ms. Shin?
That's something that I'll have to ask myself.
you moved from Boston all the way here, so what was the reason to move back after 30, 40
It
years?
was cheaper. Could live on my retirement check.
Okay.
But I don't know what keeps me here. It's definitely not the beauty.
It's the family.
Family.
Could be.
Could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I have to think about that one.
And to both of you, do you have a favorite memory in this city, town, or home even that you would want to share with us? Or you'd be honored to hear?
A favorite memory in this town?
Could be in this room, just Arkansas, the state.
I don't know if I would call it a memory, just that it's good to be back home. This is home. So, yeah.
Yeah. And for me, that's the same. But I have a beautiful memory of driving, of introducing this to my younger brothers, because one of them had not seen it. So he was just totally in awe of everything he saw. He just couldn't believe it. Man, I've had the great opportunity. I rode with my one brother. We flew from Little Rock. We drove from Little Rock here, and that was one. And then the highway was shut down, so we'd take the back roads. So I was interested in his reaction to, because he didn't grow up here, to how if a police would have. But I was so impressed with him. And then my younger brother, like I said, he had no idea. My younger brother had no idea about boundaries or filters when it came to interacting with people. So we go in stores. Oh, we were in Mississippi because we got lost getting back here, and he'd see a house. Oh, let's just ride up there and see what they're doing. I said, Tony, do you know where you are? You're not welcome just to go riding up to somebody's driveway. You know, we're in Mississippi.
That's how I felt going to the neighbor's house. I'm like, are we in the right house? I don't want them to come out. Nobody come out.
Don't want nobody to come out.
I'm like, oh, let's go. We're in the wrong side.
Well, I was thinking of, we were talking earlier about family. Have you had any chance to have family reunions or kind of get-togethers? So you talked about how important family was growing up. Is that something you've been able to continue or kind of revisit, getting family together?
Well, now that you asked that question, we're trying to put together one for October. And not halfway through, you want to shoot yourself in the foot like.
And we have had gatherings.
Yeah, every year we used to have celebrate our mother's birthday.
Nice.
Everybody would come for our mother's birthday, and that was all because the house. No matter what door you open, there was somebody asleep, like you. You wish somebody to break in because then 15 people go to the door and like, you really want to break in here? Yeah. At some point, we've had like 12 people sleeping in here, and normally the last person to get back is the tallest one,
Wow.
because we're all tall. And so you wake up in the morning, there's some legs hanging over a blow-up mattress. So those were fun times.
Nice. What do you, is there, the bookstore that's sponsoring our book launch tomorrow is Pyramid Books and Custom Art and Framing. They're based in Louisville.
Little Rock, yes.
Is there like any like independent owned bookstores in this town?
There used to be the one that Dr. Olson had, but when Kindle came, it sort of killed the business. I mean, it just basically killed it. And then it was difficult. The place we had the bookstore was not the most, we had rain. Sometimes we get rain and rain on them and you get mold and stuff. And then we were pretty much just a place to give away books. And people here, for the most part, they only read Steele. I can't think of the... Danielle. You got into Danielle Steele? That's pretty much all they were interested in. It was Danielle Steele. So, yeah.
There's no bookstores here, no. Not in Helena.
No.
Where do you, now, you're talking a lot about travel. Where have you not had the chance to travel to yet, but you'd like to eventually travel to?
Portugal. That's my next. Portugal and northern Spain.
Nice.
Those are my next. Then I want to go to Peru. I had a lot of geography as a young woman, and Peru became one of my areas of interest. The first was Brazil. I did Brazil. Now I just need to do Peru.
I have a question. You were talking about that transatlantic. What is that? Is it an event that you actually pay and they'll take you around to make you feel like you're going through it, or how did you?
No, it was just a cruise that I took. I flew from Vegas to Fort Lauderdale. We flew to Argentina. So I sailed from Argentina to West Africa.
Wow.
Just a 23. Don't ever do it because you're ready to jump off ship at 21 days on the ship is too long.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was just a regular cruise, and they hit all those.
I thought it was like an actual experience. Like they had to. I'm like, why would
No.
you do that?
The only experience they had on was during the surgeon barber. They did that as you cross the equator.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay.
But it was an exciting trip.
So we should wrap up because Dr. Olson wants us back.
Okay.
We have the schedule, but are there any final thoughts or things you'd like to share that you haven't had a chance to talk about as we kind of wrap up?
I just find it interesting that I used to read slave narratives, and now here I am basically producing a third, fourth generation slave narrative. I had the opportunity to do that, so I'm grateful to you for being interested in our stories and being as gentle, coaching those out as you have been. So thank you. Thanks to all of you. This has been a wonderful experience.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for taking us in and making us feel comfortable. You know, even just entering your home itself, like, oh, this feels so relaxed. It's like, you could be you. I like that.
I felt taken care of.
I felt taken care of, so
Well,
thank you for the hospitality.
Thank you.
We'll give you more advance notes next year.
Oh, no, this is fine. This is fine.
Well, it's for our self-interest.
Oh, okay.
That fried chicken.
We definitely have an appetite, I'll tell you that.
Okay. See, I'd be rolling out by now. June's a real cook, but
I'll stick with you, man.
yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I guess
Yeah, we, let's see. Oh, it says lunch at fast food and then go to.
Lunch at fast food. Ooh.